All right, so with all the news around these recruits dropping visit dates, whether it's in the spring or kind of announcing official visits, you're seeing players narrow down the schools that they're quite frankly interested in. You're also seeing the official visits date come down, which quite frankly at that point, whether or not they drop a top schools list, if there's only 5 official visits scheduled and there's 10 top 10 teams, there's probably only a top 5 that the player is actually interested in. So today we got to talk about some big news, or at least big news in my opinion, for some massive targets for Oklahoma here in the 2026 class that they could be pursuing, guys that are planning to be on campus, guys that include Oklahoma in their top schools list. And listen, with Oklahoma really needing to reload, especially at a couple positions on the defensive side of the ball, I think some of these names are noteworthy, and they're names that we need to keep our eyes on and definitely keep talking about. Before we do it, though, as always, I want to hear from you all. So join the discussion. Jump in the comments below. Give me your thoughts. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys hit that like, hit that subscribe button. I want you guys to be a part of the community, and we talk about recruiting content all year long, even during the football season. And it's completely free to you. All you have to do is just make sure you're subbed, and you'll be able to get all of this content. Now, if you guys watched the video the other day, talked about Braxton Lindsey. Absolutely love him as a prospect for Oklahoma to land at the linebacker position. I talked about Sinceri Johnson. Obviously, we made that video about Ely as well. And then also looking at him ending up at potentially Oklahoma, being a 5-star linebacker per se for Oklahoma to potentially go after. But we didn't really cover any of the other positions on the defensive side of the ball that Oklahoma is going to need to reload at, right? Linebacker being the biggest one of them, but defensive line. Last year, you really paid for the tackles. You really helped bolster that offensive line. This year, they'll probably go rebuild in the trenches a little bit by getting some guards, kind of really reshaping the interior, especially after you lose a guy like Eugene Brooks to UCLA, who I think a lot of people really had high expectations for, but ultimately just didn't work it out. And then you got Waywu, who's potentially going to be on his way out of the program this next year. I think he'll be draft eligible. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Oklahoma just want to get more, I guess, depth there. But on the defensive line, last year, you got Trent Wilson in the 2025 class. Before that, you got David Stone and Jaden Jackson, who have been absolute studs for you. You've had Marcus Strong for the previous class, last one in that 2023 cycle. But it's time for Oklahoma and Todd Bates to really do what I think a lot of people expected Todd Bates to do when he got to Oklahoma. And there have been some big-time defensive line prospects that we've talked about for Oklahoma that they're pursuing. And one of the guys that we're going to talk about today announced his official visit or intent to take an official visit with Oklahoma. It's not during the Champion Barbecue weekend, but he is going to be here June 6th through the 8th, and that is James Carrington, or as some people call him, Tank Carrington. Now, James Carrington, the 6'2", 240, I think 50-ish pound defensive lineman out of Bishop Gorman. I think he ended up moving to California, if I remember correctly, out of Irvine, California, out at Crean Lutheran. This is the guy that Todd Bates and Miguel Chavis, the staff, has been actively pursuing. This is definitely somebody they want to get on the squad here, and don't put it past his visits to USC and some of these other schools that you might look at, like a Georgia and an Oregon, right? Just because he's on the West Coast. He likes Oklahoma. Oklahoma is in good graces there, and they've done a very good job at making him feel like a priority. Now, I think a lot of people, though, kind of ask where James Carrington will fit, because obviously he's not sizable enough to be an interior guy. He's kind of in that edge rusher space. But I look at James Carrington as a guy that could be in that defensive end room, but he's also a guy that could kind of play the Ethan Downs role. You guys remember, Ethan Downs, like in the 260-ish range, sometimes 270, a guy that can stand up, put his hands down in the dirt, but ultimately a guy that can play in that forward technique for you as well. That's what I think James Carrington can do for Oklahoma. I think that's probably some of the biggest value here. And again, Oklahoma making James Carrington a priority, wanting to get him to be a part of this 2026 class, I think is a big deal, because again, it just cements Oklahoma's roots further in the West Coast. But Oklahoma getting the announcement that you are getting an official visit from Tank Carrington, I think it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal whether you think it or not. Now, another guy that talked about his I guess, intense with Oklahoma is Isaiah Williams. Isaiah Williams just recently dropped a top 5, and he included Oklahoma in there, as well as a school like Texas, Missouri, Ohio State, and LSU. Now, Isaiah Williams, a 6 foot, 190-pound safety out of Fort Bend, Marshall, out of Missouri City, Texas, ranked as the 421st prospect in the 247 composite rankings. This is a guy that is interesting because, again, he's got some size that I think if you're Oklahoma, you want to put in that defensive backfield. He's been to Oklahoma a couple times now. If Oklahoma's able to pull out a win like this is a guy that I think ends up in the top 200. Now, if you look on 247, all the crystal balls right now favor Texas in terms of Isaiah Williams. You even have one own Colin Kennedy submitting the prediction in favor of Texas, who's an Oklahoma guy, which usually when you see a rival team putting in their predictions for a player to land at the rival school, that's a pretty telling sign. But big news here for Oklahoma. You're getting a big-time safety, including you in the top 5, and I'd imagine Oklahoma is going to end up getting an official visit here, and that would be big for Oklahoma. But looking at the rest of the defensive line, because obviously Isaiah Williams was a safety, what could Oklahoma potentially go out there and get? What could potentially be out there? Because we've talked about defensive end room. We've talked about Jake Krull. We've talked about guys like that. But on the defensive line, on the interior, where I think Oklahoma probably has to go out there and get 3 or 4 dudes, I like a guy like Deuce Gerald's, and that's 100% a guy that if you're an Oklahoma fan, you're watching to see if Oklahoma actually gets an official visit out of him. He is out of the state of Georgia, and it's not like Oklahoma has had a ton of success in that state. But for Oklahoma to be able to go out there, be in the mix and in the contention for a guy like that, it's 100% somebody you would want to get. If you could mesh him up with a guy like James Carrington in this class, a lot of people are going to look at this class for Oklahoma on the defensive line and say they're doing a really good job. Obviously, Oklahoma has a lot of local, I guess, regional prospects they could go after. Taj Overton at the defensive line position up in Owasso is still a guy that you would expect to see Oklahoma continue to kick the tires around on. James Johnson out of North Fort Myers, Florida, recently kind of announced his official visit list. Oklahoma was not in there. Was a little bit surprising. He's got Florida, Penn State, and there was another school in there. Little surprising that James Johnson did not have Oklahoma on that list. Obviously, that could change, and I like James Johnson as a prospect, but if you don't land him, it's okay, because there is a guy by the name of Valadin Sone who has an official visit currently scheduled for Oklahoma, and I believe it is the Champion Barbecue weekend. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on that, but he is 6'3", 320 pounds. This is a guy that Todd Bates has done a really good job at basically babying that relationship a little bit, making sure that Oklahoma's in the best spot possible to go out there and go after a guy like him. And then you've got a guy like Preston Carey out of IMG Academy, who Will Conroy is going to have to go up against every single day. I'm watching to see if Preston Carey potentially wants to take a visit to Oklahoma. JJ Fitz out of Indianapolis, Indiana. There's still a ton of targets for Oklahoma to potentially continue to pursuing. And you could see more and more of those official visits drop for some of the top prospects in the entire country. And I think most Oklahoma fans on the defensive line, you have your eyes and you have your heart set on Deuce Gerald's. You're waiting to see that official announcement to come out, because if you're Oklahoma, you're battling the likes of the Alabamas, the Auburns, the Ohio States, and Georgias, and schools like that. So that's kind of where we're at right now for some of the defensive line guys that are going to be taking official visits. If you guys have made it this far into the video and you guys have not already, make sure you guys hit that like, hit the subscribe button, join the discussion below. Let me know your guys' thoughts. We'll see you guys next time.